Well, good afternoon. It's always bad to be right after lunch. You guys are, I'm going to see if I can put you guys to sleep. I'm going to speak really bad and monotone. So that's how it works. So, for those that don't know me, I don't like to be called doctor. I know I earned it, but I just don't like to go by it. But I'm currently a professor at Brigham Young University, Idaho in public health. I've been teaching drugs abuse and abuse for about 21 years now. So I kind of followed a lot of what's going on with the trends as much as I can. There's some new things that are coming on the market, and some new things that have kind of taken fentanyl and taken it to a whole nother world that I'll talk about today. But and then also there's a program that I've sat through 2 presentations in Washington, D.C. over veterinary medicine and just in comparison over to human medicine too. So hopefully I'm going to throw a lot of data at you today. Stop me if you have any questions or if there's anything in there you kind of need explained, but I try to keep up on this stuff as much as I can. And so a lot of this data I'm going to go over today with you is fresh from last Friday. I sat through a really good on Friday on one of these drugs that we're going to kind of talk about a little bit, but I want to talk about some of the stats that are out there. In case you don't know, in 21 over into 22, we had our highest overdose death in the United States, almost 107,000 preventable deaths due to overdoses. The majority of those, which we'll talk about today, come from synthetic opioids, which is a big problem that's out there. And you can see where our trends have been going over the years. A lot of the drivers within this, I was very anxious to find out where our data was coming back from after COVID. And can you ever hear me okay? I'm really loud as is, but
you're great, Dr. Yeah.
Thanks. But I was waiting for the data to come back after COVID to see what was happening, to see if our numbers have gone down or gone up, and they went up, especially among youth. Talk about some of those that are tiled over from drug abuse, and then also with mental health issues. So, but again, that's probably where our current state of the U.S. is on the overdose crisis. We are at our highest, and again, those are preventable. These are very preventable, and that's what we work with in our different coalitions. Let's talk about unintentional drug poisonings within that 107,000 in 2021. 92.1 were what we classified as unintentional. And then you've got 4.1, which were due to suicides, and then 3.6 were undetermined, and then all the way down to 1% were on homicides. The interesting piece that we're seeing out there is these unintentional deaths, or what they're classified. Anybody know what our leading cause of death in the United States is? Was it?
Heart disease?
Yep, heart disease is our number 1. Anybody know what number 2 is? Cancer. And then we flipped and flopped between 3 and 4. We have we start getting into stroke, diabetes is moving up, suicides are moving up depending on the age groups. But one thing that we're seeing, and I work with a couple of the coroners in the state, and the interesting thing is on deaths that are attributed to our leading cause within heart disease, a lot of times they're not reported. So we're looking at new reporting pieces. I know Mallory, we were talking to Mallory about this too, with Eastern Idaho Public Health, and also within our corners of what's reported that would be associated with drug abuse. A good example of that is, if you guys remember, I think I listened to their music. I'm just dating me now, Nirvana. You guys remember Kurt Cobain? Does anybody know what Kurt Cobain died of? It was classified as a suicide, but he was using heroin very heavily. So the question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the death associated with heroin, or did the heroin push it to the mental issue, which falls into suicide? These are some of these deaths we have to talk about that are out there that a lot of times aren't classified. So one thing we're looking at, especially I'm looking up in Madison County, is just the data that's coming back from their deaths, and then what the coroner will classify with an intended death, yada, yada, yada. So it's a whole nother ball of wax that I could talk about for days. But other trends out there from 99 to 21, this is, again, everything's going up. The one interesting one is the black line that's right here. This would be the percent of, let's read it over there. Yep, this would be within your opioids, and that's the one that we're really starting to talk about, is how the opioids has just been going up. the death rates. Again, if you look at your percentages, and this is why I put this up here, because a lot of us work with youth, and that is ages 5 to 24 years. You guys are just like me. You guys take pictures. Guess what? I'm going to send you the slides. All this stuff is cited, so I'll give you that. You guys don't have to frantically write everything down, take pictures. My phone is full of slide pictures. Drives me nuts. So again, this is your ages 5 to 24, which is a lot of times what we work with. And it's sad to say that 5. David and I, who else was with us in DC when we went to the DEA? Yes, thank you. I was like, I knew that was good because we all had to go through security that was like tighter than TSA.
Yeah.
When we were in Washington, DC in January, February, we went to the DEA museum and the DEA headquarters. And in the lobby of the DEA, they have thousands. In fact, I want to say there was 4,000. They had another 3,000 that they could have put up of pictures of people that have died due to fentanyl, just fentanyl itself. The sad part of that one was the youngest was
18 months.
18 months. The oldest was 71, I do believe. And then they did have a couple pictures of siblings. One was a set of 3 siblings that had died pretty close to each other. But yeah, they had a few 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and they went up from there, which means they either got a hold of it, depending on what the circumstances are, which a lot of them they don't. They have another 3,000. They don't know where to put those pictures. And again, it's just a drop of well that we're seeing throughout the United States, just from what they have within those 7,000 pictures. It was pretty moving, wasn't it? It was very sombering. I think that was probably a better term for it. So, all right, a couple things just with youth. I know some of you work within youth. I know SIA here in Bonneville County has a great teen center that they work within youth. There's a good correlation of data that I wanted to share with you, just as kind of a side thing. But this is some youth trends that are really out there. I want to talk about youth mental health just a little bit, because what we're seeing is a lot of these youth are using substances to cope as a coping mechanism to get through a mental health issue, which just exacerbates it. Because think about if somebody's suffering from depression and they're using alcohol, which is a depressant, which just makes it worse. And that's where a lot of these numbers are starting to come into play. Nearly 2 in 5 children and adolescents will meet the criteria for a mental disorder by the age of 18. Half by 14. So you see the numbers that are down here, the percentage of high school students who experience persistent feelings of sadness. A lot of this stuff is when we started to head through COVID, which just made it bigger and worse. So anyway, these numbers, but I want you guys to see the trends. See the trends that are going from 2009 all the way to 2018. These are huge issues right here. These are numbers that we just really haven't seen for a long time. So we do have this issue, and then obviously drugs and alcohol make it even worse. Through COVID, again with the CDC, adolescent behaviors and experiences surveys, the word called ABES. Again, this was released in April of last year. 37% experienced poor mental health most of the time, or always during COVID. There was isolation, didn't have their friends, couldn't be around things. Yeah, it just made it worse. Poor mental health, 31%, 44% persistently felt sad or hopeless. During the past year, 55% experienced emotional abuse by a parent, because the parents were going through it too. Parents were going through things, especially with unemployment. And a lot of what we call our health disparities. I teach a class on health disparities also up there. And it's amazing teaching people about what disparities are if you haven't gone through it. But some of these kids that are in my class, they've never experienced homelessness. And then on the other side of the coin, I do have kids that are homeless. And it was interesting hearing back on these reports when they were going through and telling us how they're living through homelessness or living. We have a huge population lives in the United States, lives in their cars. That's the only thing they have. And imagine what stress that puts on the body, what puts on yourself. And then a lot of people turn to alcohol and drugs just to cope. So we have to take all those things into consideration to start with. Other connection between mental health and substance abuse, 12 to 17-year-olds. And again, this is with and without your major depressive episode, but illicit drugs. Do you see your numbers? Marijuana, opioid, binge drinking, and then the tobacco products that are out there. So interesting stats when you look at a lot of these slides. And again, we could spend the next 4 hours talking about just, one of these slides. But again, that's those. And then substance abuse, when we talk about ACEs, who's familiar with ACEs? Who's not familiar with ACEs? Good, thank you. Gotta make sure everybody understands ACEs. ACEs are what we call adverse childhood experiences. And what we try to track is how many ACEs that individuals have. If they start getting to where they're having 4 or more, and again, what are they? Well, you've got, whoops. Go back, there we go. The other thing you have to look at up here is abuse, neglect, household challenges, any of these things that are in there. But they do have an effect on kids. And what we try to do is we try to intervene at a time that can give them the best chance that they possibly can so that they don't have those ACEs that carry over into adulthood. It just gets worse and worse and worse for some of these kids. So these are some of the things that we look at. ACEs not included in the traditional measure down into here, but these still are. Are these still pretty bad? Yeah.
Bullying, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the bullying, the bullying's. Oh, I could talk about that all day too. Sorry. 61% of adults reported experiencing at least one ACE, and then 1 in 6 adults reported experiencing 4+. What happens with those 4+ versus the 1? That's where we head into this one. And this is the one we really start to look at is when we get into substance abuse. And these are the number of reported. So the blue line is the 4+. So what we see is kids that have 4 or more ACEs, what are they more likely to turn to? So we have to look at how we run a lot of our prevention programming and how we look at some things, because depending on if we look at a primary prevention aspect, what can we do? We try to work within the community to lower these ACEs for these kids, because that does lead into, so we look at what's really feeding into the drug use a lot of times, or the alcohol use. Well, a lot of that times that comes under the trauma. Doesn't mean we have to intervene by going into their homes and yanking them out of there. But there are opportunities that we can give these kids and these individuals to be able to have a better chance. Okay. Other one, when we talk about opioid overdoses deaths, I'm going to talk about these a little bit. With the United States, we're seeing 3 major trends with opioid use. And it goes all the way back to 99. So the first wave is in the 90s that we started to see. And if you look at this graph over here as we start to go, the second one is in 2010, where we really started to see a spike in heroin. And now we're seeing heroin go down. And in 2013 is when the third wave hit. That third wave is where we really started to see fentanyl start to take off. And some people talk about we're heading into a 4th one right now, the 4th wave. But some people say that we're still in the 3rd, and that 3rd one just hasn't really peaked because we're still moving at a very rapid rate when we go up. And you can see where those synthetic opioids out there, that's where that fentanyl is really starting to spike, and it's went up. A lot of it has to do with cost, it has to do with availability, and it has to do with purity. Same issue we have with meth on the streets. Meth had 2 big spikes. One of it was when it was being made with ephedrine. Which ephedrine was pretty strong stuff. And then obviously we started to control the ephedrine. So what did they switch to? Should we make meth? I always wanted to see if we can have a lab and do that. But anybody know what the main ingredient that we put in meth? Somebody said it. Pseudoephedrine. Yep, it's your pseudoephedrine. That's your cold medicine. This is why when you go get allergy medicine, sorry, not cold, allergy medicine. This is why you have to sign the registry and show your license, so you're not going to make meth. So pseudoephedrine's hit into that. Now you can make this stuff in a 2-liter bottle. It's pretty easy to make. But again, heroin's starting to go down, fentanyl's taking off, it's just more potent. And sat through a great presentation in Washington, D.C. earlier this year. And the assistant director for the DEA basically told us there's 2 major cartels in Mexico. They're the ones that are pretty much controlling all of this. And they've made it very cheap. They've also made it very easy. It's just easy to make, and they are pumping a ton into the United States. A lot of they're getting their supplies from China. The other thing that's very interesting about the cartels is the amount that they're really pumping into the United States. They had enough seizures just last year, which I think was 50 million, I think. They had enough pill seizures just last year in the United States, the DEA did, to kill every single human or every single American citizen. That's how much was just seized. It's nothing compared to what's really coming over. And it's cheap. So heroin is kind of taking that dive, fentanyl's taking that over. Little thing with fentanyl. I think we turn the lights down. Yeah. I always knock those down, so it's asking for you guys to see things. Well, I could have done. But it was like over there. Dan, will you please get up? Is that better? Promise me you won't fall asleep.
He's like a coffee run while you're out.
Yeah.
Coffee's still there.
So we talk about those deaths. 67% of all drug overdose deaths and 90% of opioid involved overdose deaths involves synthetic opioids. We do exclude methadone in that stats, but again, that's our biggest piece that's out there within fentanyl. This stuff is very potent. I don't want to take too much on fentanyl because I know that Monty is going to be talking about fentanyl tomorrow. So I don't want to spend too much, but I wanted you guys to see this. This is that potency timeline. We compare everything back to morphine, and morphine, again, 0 times itself, all the way down to heroin. And then has anybody heard of U47700? It's also known as Peaky. This was another one that came on the market, but it kind of spiked and went back down. And then fentanyl, of course, and then all the way down to, a lot of you have heard of carfentanil. This is where you get down to torphine. These are the ones that take down elephants. Very small amounts. I can't believe a human being can even take carfentanil, but we do have people that have moved and titrated that up to that over time and built up that tolerance level that's in there. But this is your potency timeline when you really look at the drugs that are out there. So when you look at fentanyl, there's harder pieces that are out there.
Is xylazine up there too?
We're going to talk about xylazine today. Yeah, that's one of the big ones. I'm glad you brought that up because that's the one we're going to talk about today. And xylazine won't fall on that potency piece, and I'll tell you why today. Another one that's in here, just kind of give it into references on how much. I just wanted to kind of show you this. Fentanyl is, like it says there down at the bottom, it is very fast acting, especially when we take the most efficacious way of doing it, which is injecting. Injecting is just fast. And then, and usually when we get to the point where people are injecting, it means they're pretty much into it. But it used to be a progression. It used to go from prescription pills, and then people would slowly then start to inject those, and then they flip over to heroin. Now we're seeing people that are bypassing the whole system and just going straight to fentanyl. And fentanyl does not mix well. It takes a little bit, and it's this much, and we're talking about 2 milligrams. Some people compare that to about a grain of rice to a half a grain of rice, or sorry, a grain of sand to a half a grain of sand. Stuff is very potent. The other thing you have to remember on this one also is that, Mallory, you're going to talk about this tomorrow, aren't you? I'm going to skip this one. You guys have seen this before. Used to be that we could be able to tell. Now we can't tell. They're getting very good at it. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to detect by just looking at the pill. You have to test this stuff. And the sad part is how many kids are now starting to produce these things to look like ibuprofen and to look like other things just to conceal it. And imagine if one of our kids is at school and they ask for an ibuprofen or they ask for something from one of their friends. That's what we're seeing. That's where that campaign comes in, One Pill Kills. And this is the part, these kids they weren't intending to use drugs at all. And bam, it's hard on the system and it doesn't mix well, which I'll show you on the next slide.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to tell somebody's taking it like for the first time, if it's not a lethal dose or something like that, where they're overdosing. Their symptoms or their indications that somebody's taking this kind of a drug that you can see that they're not disclosing that information to you.
Meaning, can you tell if somebody's what they're taking?
Yeah.
Some symptoms you can be able to tell from that, but generally They're gonna drop pretty quick because it's very hard on the system. This is where naloxone really comes in to have it available, and especially having it available in everywhere. I wish we could do that. I know with Mallory teaches this and takes it everywhere. We try to get it everywhere, but I'm to the point now where should we all be carrying it? In some states, they're teaching second and third graders how to administer naloxone because it's so prevalent and their parents are using it. And teaching kids that now, that's where we're at in some states. Yeah, naloxone saves lives. It just does. But we're going to talk about a little curve to that. But no, I mean, if somebody drops, what do? We can administer naloxone and then we can assume that might be it. But then we have to check breathing. We got to call medics fast and get them there. And Mallory's going to teach a little. I don't want to take Mallory's thunder. She's really good at this. I've sat through her presentation now. This will be fifth time. It's the fifth time. She's good. She's good at her stuff. So does that help a little bit? It's hard to tell.
I was just thinking of like in the early stage of like they were built up to use that. Are there indications or things to look out for? Just kind of how it's translated.
You're with your pupils and stuff. You can look at the science, but the tough thing is was it fentanyl? Was it some other type of opioid? Was it? We're going to talk about xylazine today. It's tough to tell within those now, especially now. And I'll get to it in the slide, but xylazine's being big time mixed now with fentanyl, and it doesn't reverse with naloxone because it's not an opioid.
When you ask about signs, are you talking about like are there behaviors
Yeah.
that show a kid is amping up to start doing weird stuff?
Oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I'm thinking they already used it. They're gone. They're passed.
No,
So.
no. Sorry.
They're gonna have weird behavior, no matter what they're on. I mean, it just depends, every kid's different, but if they're on something that they shouldn't be on, you're gonna be able to tell just by the behavior.
They're gonna start med seeking really bad.
Sleeping too much, not taking care of their appearance.
There's red flags. There's red flags you'll start to see.
You'll know.
If they're getting up to where they're taking fentanyl on purpose, and they've moved up into. There's a lot of red flags that'll be up into that.
So is the desomorphine crocodile still
Good.
like? Is that gone down a lot since fentanyl's gone out?
Desomorphine or crocodile. Who's familiar with that one in here? I don't want to jump too far. Some of you are. Some of you are like, "Whoa, stuff's nasty." This is really fun if you want to see some really nasty pictures, due to just the lesions and the ulcerations and the things that it leaves. But desomorphine is actually a Schedule I drug according to the DEA with the CSA of 1970, the scheduling. So it's a Schedule I drug. We don't see it as much out there, but it does fall into the opioid world. That's different than the xylazine, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's a different, but the ulcerations are very similar to it. Is that what you were wondering? If is it still being used?
Yeah.
It's still out there, Kendall.
Yeah, I think the prevalence was higher in Europe.
It was known as a Russian drug, and by the time it hit over to us, I want to say, I got to get my dates right. I want to say we're talking 2006. We haven't seen anything since about 2006, I think. All right.
Yeah, along those lines.
Yeah, we haven't seen over here, but over in Russia. Yeah. Okay, make sure this stuff doesn't mix at all. And that's the biggest thing I wanted you guys to get from this, because I know Mallory will talk about this and I'm sure Monty will too, but it just doesn't mix. If you were to take normal sugar and then take some brown sugar and then probably put it in a mixer and mix it up, it just doesn't mix evenly. So the problem and the concern is that they can press pills depending on who's pressing them. They didn't mix it well, and I could hand out, to 3 of you the pills, and I could take the 4th one, and one of us could drop dead, and the other 3 could be fine. So you don't know. This is playing pretty much Russian roulette when you're dealing with mixture stuff with infect. It just doesn't mix into whatever they're mixing it in with. It just doesn't mix well at all. They talk about the chocolate chipping. If you guys look at chocolate chip cookies, I don't know, I'm very obsessive compulsive, I guess, and I will purposely count how many chocolate chips I put in. No, I'm just But yeah, it just doesn't mix necessarily well. So, and again, the one pill kills campaign. The sad part is how many of these kids were just not intending. They were just maybe had some anxiety, wanted to take somebody that through to their friend. I know what I teach my kids, that is, do not take any pill unless I give it to you. Anybody. Or to that point, you just don't take a pill that you don't know where it came from. So that's how blunt it has to necessarily be. Just, and that's what we got to teach our youth, is just don't do it. So. All right, let's talk about xylazine. Who in here is familiar with xylazine or heard anything about it? Good. So some of you have. Okay. A lot. Just a little. But who's
around?
Marco? You've heard a lot. Good. Good. Xylazine. This is very interesting drug because guess what? It's not for human consumption. This is a veterinarian medicine. It is a tranquilizer for animals. Again, and I'll get to this after, but there are not very many drugs out there. And I have to really research how many of these are, and this is kind of a new thing. But I think there's only 2, and xylazine is one of them, that there is medicine for in veterinary medicine, and then medicines for human that is not the same. And we'll talk about drug diversion from vet offices here later, but xylazine is one of these. This thing is, it's been around for a little while, but again, it's only been for animals. It's also known as tranq, but it is a depressant. It does cause amnesia. A lot of your hypnotic, like when you guys go in for surgery, if you guys remember, if you ever went in for surgery, went under anesthesia, it induces amnesia. That's what anesthesia does. It's just, but that's why they have to monitor your breathing so it doesn't suppress it. Remember when you guys went in for surgery and then you blinked and it's like 7 hours later? Because it doesn't, your body doesn't have to remember the trauma that just went through. That's what anesthesia is. This right here, again, only for animals. So here's the timeline to understand a little bit about xylazine. Came around in 1962. Yes, that is Bayer aspirin. They did come out with this. You'd be amazed. Anybody know what else Bayer aspirin came out with besides aspirin? What is it?
Alice.
Cells?
No, Alice.
Pesticide.
Okay, good. That too. What else? Heroin. Yes, good job in the back. If I had prizes, I'd send you one. Yeah, Bayer company actually came out with heroin. In fact, the heroin was selling more than the aspirin was, and then World War II broke out. Then Bayer was a Germany company, and then after, was it World War I or World War II? I'm getting tired. I've been at this too long. And then it ended up getting flipped over to the United States, and so now it's a American company that's out there. So it is a non-opioid sedative. Very important to remember, this is not an opioid at all, because this will come back into play. And again, recreational use, we saw in Puerto Rico in 2001 and 2006 to 2018, it showed up within testing. 2019, we started to see overdose deaths, and in 2022, the FDA issues a warning. We are right on the cusp of this one really flipping over to a possibly emergency schedule. And we're waiting kind of for Dr. Gupta, which we'll talk about in a minute. But he's the one that's going to kind of push this, and then it'll flip over to the DEA, and the DEA will put it as probably a Schedule I drug. That's what we're thinking of. But it's very hard for us to really flip into, it's not for human use, it's for animals. So we're kind of in. So what we're seeing is xylazine is being mixed with fentanyl. According to Friday's, and I always question stuff, but this is coming from the Office of National Drug Control Policy with the White House. That webinar that I sat on Friday was the latest on it, which was very interesting. But they're stating that, and this is where the stat comes in, 90% of fentanyl that they're testing out there has trace amounts, if not a lot, of xylazine in it. In fact, the 2 people that presented actually talked about that they're seeing now more xylazine in the fentanyl than the fentanyl. And so it does, the reason why people are mixing this together and why it's coming in there is because it prolongs the effects. And so it keeps that, what we call the nod. That's that dreamy, wakeful sleep that people have when they take like heroin or take a type of opioid. It keeps them in that for a longer state. And that's probably the biggest thing. And that's where you get this down here. It adds to the opioid effect. And that's where that nod comes into play. And so people like that dopey feeling where they walk around just in like zombies. And that's that dreamy state that they start to look at with that. So it's very cheap and it's very pervasive. We're seeing it throughout all markets now, especially in the 3 states that are probably seeing the biggest push right now is Maryland, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. Ohio is seeing it and it's moving. Let me show you the data where it's at in the United States. So, but they're finding it combined with heroin and cocaine also. And you can get it in liquid. That's probably the biggest ones. But some people, what they'll do is they'll get it in the powdered form if they order it from another country, which we don't know where a lot of the stuff is coming from. It's just hitting really fresh on the scene. And or they're getting it from a vet office. They're either diverting it or they're stealing it or wherever they're getting it out there. And scary part is it's just flooded. It's really flooded the market that's out there. So that's what it does. Some people will inject this, but again, I've seen the liquid, and then some people dry the liquid out to kind of leaves a kind of a precipitate kind of, and then they'll scrape it to depending on what they're going to use it for. So here's the expansion portion that we talked about, or that we talked about within 2019. Then we go to 2020, then we go to 2021. You see how quick it's moved in those years. That's how much we've seen it. I've also seen now that they have about 38 states right here in 2021. As of Friday, they said that it has now expanded to 48 states. They've seen it down into 48. And when I say March, that was Friday. This is Friday's numbers, which is fun. I love getting data that's fresh. I hate playing with data. It's like 3 years old. Other things within the prevalence that's out there, when we talk about the CDC with the suitors involved in deaths in 23 of the 38 reporting states in 2019, 67%, and then cause of death in 64.3% of those that they detected it. And then we saw a 5 times increase and then a 12 times increase since 2018. That's how far this has jumped up, and that's how fast it's jumped up, really fast. Here is how fast it has jumped within the regions of the United States. And I know what you guys are thinking. It hasn't really hit us yet. Is it really that big of a deal? This is what the East Coast said when we were having a meth epidemic. Oh, we're dealing with cocaine. We're dealing with other types of drugs over here. That's not a big deal. Yeah, well, the Midwest and the East is getting nailed right now with methamphetamine too. So it is hitting us, and it will be here. It is here, but it will be here even more. But look at your numbers. I mean, these are incredible numbers on those percent increases. That's just where that's jumped just from 2020 to 2021. So
I'm just wondering if you're going to get to the economics of the drug. All in your presentation.
what do you mean by economics?
The economics, like the funding and who's pushing it, how they're benefiting from it.
We don't know. The xylazine portion to it, we don't know who kind of pushed this, but now somebody's pushing it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's still the cartels that are pushing fentanyl too, because somebody's got to be mixing it with it. And it's sad because this is almost like the Cold War in East Germany when East Germany was doping all of their athletes with steroids. We're using people as basically lab rats. We're just seeing what's going to happen to them, and that's all they're doing. They're using people, and these people, addiction it's real, and it's tough to get off. But yeah, they're just experimenting with it. So economics, when you talk about who's pushing it and why they're doing it, cartels are making a ton. I wouldn't doubt, but they didn't give us any number or they did not give us any data on who's doing it because it's unknown. We don't know where it's coming from. Wouldn't be surprised if it was China. Wouldn't be surprised if it is the Mexican cartels. So,
Jim, don't think it's not coming soon, guys. I'm up north in Post Falls, I've seen it in Spokane already, so it's not just the west side of Washington, it's also on the east side.
If you've got fentanyl, chances are you're gonna get xylazine.
It's tough.
Oh yeah, it's hitting hard, but I mean, these just percentages are just big time. This was the other one with Dr. Gupta. What constitutes, just as a side thing, what constitutes an emerging threat that's out there? He is right on the cusp. In fact, he had meetings last week at the White House that he brought this up. So any day we could hear that we're going to put this on an emergency schedule, but it is an emerging threat. Where do they get emerging threats from? It has to be more than 50%, which we're on that. And then it does have the criteria to take it seriously. We're trying to get ahead of this as fast as they possibly can. And the scary part about, which I'll talk about in here, it's undermining our statistics on fentanyl overdoses. Because now we've added another drug into it that is now changing the way that we're dealing with fentanyl overdoses. It's changing the stats completely out there. It's kind of throwing everything off. And so they're trying to gauge the stuff as fast as they can. So just wanted to throw this up, which I thought was interesting that they did. And they threw up Connecticut, Illinois, Alabama. The biggest thing I want you guys to see with this is here's all the drugs that we're seeing them mixed with. And then if you look at this, xylazine clear across the board is with fentanyl. So we're mostly seeing it with fentanyl, but it doesn't mean that it's not mixed with other drugs. That's the other thing I want to look at.
So like Narcan for fentanyl, it doesn't work for this. So what reverses the effects of this?
I'll get to it. Hold on. That's a very good question. I'm gonna get to it. Because that's the part that we want to still push, but hold that thought. Hold that thought. I'm gonna get to it. So talk about tissue injury. If you don't like injuries, don't look at these pictures. Sorry. But what this does is this does cause, very similar to what we talked about with crocodile. It does cause these really nasty lesions. I mean, the wounds are like burn wounds. This is what this causes because it causes what we call a direct vasoconstriction around that. It does not mean that once they inject that it's going to happen at that spot. It can show up somewhere else. They could be injecting in the arm, but it can show up on the legs. It doesn't necessarily have to. Some people miss, and you'll see that on the quote here in the next one, they miss the vein, it goes into the tissue, and it can cause that. The freaky part about it is some of them will actually inject into the wound because they've had too many collapsed veins. So I'll get the picture out of
Can
it.
you go back 1 second?
Yeah.
I just have a question. Is it a marijuana stop?
It's
It's a marijuana stop, yeah.
So do these lesions happen?
Good job, Becky.
Used, or
What's that? Sorry.
do these lesions happen like the very first time they lose or over time?
It can cause over time within this one. That I'm going to tell you a couple stories of some people on this is not the scary part of this one, guys. I haven't even got to the scary part of what this does. This is just one piece of what's out there. And if you guys know, if people are into severe drug use, especially within injecting fentanyl, the xylazine hits, we're going to talk about withdrawals. And they're living on the street, want to take care of themselves. You add other types of health disparities in there. This is where we get amputations. This is where we get deaths. This is a whole nother level that we've taken this drug. And that's why fentanyl, the
And it all
whole.
starts with their soft choices.
Yeah, you know.
And the parents buying them, their socks at.
Yes. Or yeah, just over the border. We'll blame it on Ontario. So this is a quote from a lady that actually, and I know the English, I did put it straight over there. It's not that I typed this wrong, but you shoot, you miss, right? So they inject, but they miss the vein. It hits into the tissue instead, which IM versus IV is not efficacious, which kind of ticks them off when they look at it. You get the sore, starts out for some people like a pimple on the skin, and then it just starts spreading after that. And they're not necessarily going to go in to get help for it. But this lady talks about how she could have lost her hand completely, but I'm going to tell you a story about other people that have lost limbs completely because of it, because gangrene will set in. infections, things like that. Withdrawals. Withdrawals are any questions on this one, or let me go back. Any questions on this? On the ulcerations and everything?
How long does it stay, or do they know how long it stays in the tissue?
Meaning how long, if somebody IMs, if they just into the muscle, it's going to absorb over time, but it's just not, it's one of those drugs that's just not for human consumption. So it causing that, it's going to start to constrict those vessels, and it's going to start that sore, and it's just going to start to spread. And then obviously if they're injecting, it's just feeding it. And another scary part of this, which I'll tell you in a minute, it has a very, very, very short half-life. Fentanyl has a half-life of about 3 to 7 hours, depending on the person, depends on how much you take in purity. You got to take all that stuff into consideration. About 3 to 7 hours on fentanyl. This has 25 to maybe 50 minutes. So people, yeah. But it does prolong the fentanyl portions to it, but it has a very short life. So what people are doing now, which I'll talk about now, which is the withdrawals. The withdrawals are nasty. That's probably me. I've been studying this stuff for a long time. I thought heroin was your worst. Heroin is, if somebody's on heroin for a long period of time, which has a lot of adulterants, depending on if you start heading into black tar type of heroin, if somebody's using heroin and they're using it for a while, now you get this flip. And most of you guys know this. This is just classic addiction. You go from a pleasure to a pain principle. So now the body now becomes dependent upon it. The receptors within the brain, the body just has to become dependent upon it, has to have it all the time in order to function normally. So some people, when they get into heroin and they get into this opioid addiction world, they're injecting somewhere between 30 and 40 times a day. They have to find this because otherwise they go through the withdrawals. So all they're doing now is not the high, they're going for just fighting off the withdrawals. And the withdrawals for heroin are nasty. If you've all had the flu, which I think everybody in here has, it's probably the greatest time in your life. Right? Thank you. I'm just seeing if anybody's listening. It's nasty. You're shaking, you're losing it from all parts of the body. You are just don't want to eat. Chills, you're throwing up, diarrhea, everything. It's nasty. Imagine having that for weeks. And all they have to do is inject and it goes away. So it's not, that's what addiction does for these individuals. My heart breaks for them because now they've flipped to, they're just fighting off the withdrawals. Xylazine throws heroin out the window when it comes to withdrawals. These are the nastiest withdrawals, and they come fast. They come super fast. And that's the part that I think scares me the most, because we don't know enough what's in the drugs they're taking to know, is it withdrawals from the opioid or is it withdrawals from the xylazine? That's where people will leave AMA, especially if they go into emergency department, because the withdrawals are so bad, they got to go find the drug. And that's what happens when you become so dependent upon a drug. But again, very painful. When we talk about painful, heroin, I thought when we talked about those was very painful. People are going through it. No, this is way worse. It's way worse. The pain is. And then obviously people will go in there for the pain also, which you have to do within the sores. And we don't know a lot of the treatment options with this because it's a veterinary type of drug. I don't want to get too scientific, but this is where I get fun when we talk about brain transmitters. Xylazine is a alpha-2 agonist. It is the same as, I was talking to you guys about this, but it's the same as Klonopin. Did I say Klonopin? I always mix it up with clonidine. Klonopin. Klonopin is, anybody know what Klonopin is? It is used in psychiatric medicines for some. It's also anti-anxiety. It's like an anxiety pill, but it's also used for high blood pressure. And this is very similar because they're both what we call alpha-2 agonists. And so, which goes after norepinephrine, and it also goes after dopamine. Those are the two, your dopamines, your feel good, your pleasure portions to it. And then we get into epinephrine, norepinephrine, all those with your fight or flight. Xylazine is one of those agonists, so it kind of blocks that. So they did talk about there are overdoses with Klonopin, and so therefore we kind of follow the same type within that one. But when you go into an emergency room, we don't know. Thinking it's the fentanyl, they don't know what it is. So what they'll do is they'll test, but it can take up to 24 hours for them to get the blood work back. So what will people do? Do you think they're going to wait around? They're gone. Yeah, they're gone. And that's where it's starting to get a little scary. Xylazine withdrawal can cause intense anxiety also and dysphoria. Medications used to treat opioid withdrawals don't work well with xylazine. That's why we said opioids with heroin and the withdrawals. What do we have? What's our number one drug out there to handle withdrawals for opioids? Methadone. Methadone's our biggest one. There is a few other ones out there, which is LAM. And then there's, yes, thank you. There's another one. Yeah. Yes, that's the other one I was thinking of. And the biggest one that we use mostly in especially within detox and then with counselors is the methadone. Methadone still gives you a subjective high, so they're more going to be apt to process and talk about what's really, kind of the issues are. The other ones kind of just take it away, and people, they don't want to talk. It kind of shuts that down. So you can slowly kind of titrate them. But people are avoiding hospitals because they feel like withdrawals can't be managed at the hospital, so they'll just manage it on the streets. It's easier to manage it on the streets with this one. That's how bad it is that's out there. Yeah, I'll tell you a couple other stories here in a minute. But other thing with patient management, like I was telling you before, xylazine is not detected by your toxicology screens because we're not really looking for it. This is one that came on, and we really don't have those easy tests to be able to test for it. It takes a little bit of time. So that's a concern. That's kind of slowed this process down because we are in the preliminary stages of our testing. And then xylazine is not known to be reversed by naloxone. This is where we start talking about naloxone. Naloxone only works on opioids. So if somebody takes a fentanyl pill and it does have more xylazine in it, I'm going to tell you here in a minute what it's going to necessarily do on that one, but the naloxone is only going to take care of the opioid portion to it. So, but there is ways to still monitor this, and I'll show you about a program in Philadelphia that they're doing. So it's kind of cool stuff. And I don't want to take too much from Mallory's because Mallory's going to talk about that more and how it works within the receptors and portions. Okay, policy actions that are out there. Not going to go through this stuff in too much detail, but I did want you guys to see from a policy standpoint, which probably the only one that's interested in this is Marco.
We used to do it automatically every year. We get adopted, the FDA does. But once in a while, they'll reject a couple of them, which I don't understand.
In state board of pharmacies can do an emergency schedule. The only one that's done that so far is, if you look down into here, is Ohio. Ohio just did it on the 29th, which was just last week. And I read their report, which I have.
That's in right now, and see if they can do it.
It's a good report. And I was able to fact check a lot of what the White House told me. Not that I don't trust the government, but I always try to back up what I teach. And so anyway, you see all of that within the federal portions to it. And then now the states. There are some warnings out there with some states. In a minute, I'm going to show you a slide of what and why I'm even telling you this on what you can do, because CDC within the drug-free communities grant is pushing us to do more. And there's things that we can do here just in Idaho. So, like I said, Ohio is the only one that moved it from a non-scheduled drug, which it is, to a Schedule 3. They went ahead and put emergency, and your state board of pharmacies can do that. They can keep it on for a certain time. And Idaho, I don't think we have anything. Kendall, can you or Marco tell me? I don't think Idaho has any scheduled drugs that's different than the CSA with DEA.
I don't know for sure, but I don't believe so.
Yeah. Okay, coalitions. Why do we need to know this? This is where it gets fun. Coalitions need to be a resource for their community to get the information out. And I'm presenting this stuff, and that's why I'm going to send it out to you. Get this information out to people as much as you can, because we need to educate people, especially our youth. It has taken fentanyl. We always knew fentanyl was dangerous, but this has now taken it to a more dangerous drug, way more dangerous than we probably ever thought. Okay, assume that our fentanyl has xylazine in it. Just assume it. And according to the White House, we're at 90%. I did read Ohio's stats, and their stats are coming back at between 30 and 40% just in Ohio. But they're saying 90. That's what we're seeing. Seeing an epidemic in Philadelphia, big time. One of the emergency room doctors was Dr. Michael Ashburn. He presented there and gave us some really interesting stories, which I'll tell you. But we're seeing more of it in the pills, like I said, than the fentanyl. So people are now finding just the xylazine so they can handle the withdrawals. That's the only thing that they're really going after it. So they don't have to handle the withdrawals. Some questions that were asked in there is how simple. Oh, the other thing in here is, like we said, it is coming, isn't it? I mean, you said Spokane, yeah, it's coming. If it's not already here. And I would advise you to go out there and find them. But we need to push naloxone still. And because I'm going to tell you.
You can have to get it from first responders now, because legislature didn't approve it. You go out and ask if we had that. It's kind of annoying.
Isn't the harm reduction still?
They cut off the funding except for first responders in the manner that they had been in the past few years. I irritated by that.
I heard a rumor too that, I mean, you could still be.
Get it from
But
first responders, you're not gonna be able to get it like we did.
you can't get it for free.
I've heard this.
And they're trying to make
Still
it.
there.
You can't get it at all.
What's that, Mallory?
I know harm reduction project would still have it, but now that their funding is changing, they can give out what they have, and then they won't be able to purchase more to distribute to non-first responders.
It's kind
As of right now, I'm still have it. I'll talk about that.
Yeah, Mallory will talk about that more tomorrow. So I'm hurrying. I should have a couple more things to go over. How simple is it to test for? Again, limited testing, like I said, emergency rooms. We don't know a lot about this. So when we do a tox screen and we look at this within the emergency rooms or emergency departments, it's going to take some time. By that time, people are going with withdrawals. They're not necessarily handling those. In the ER and the EDs are not necessarily made to do that. And so people will leave. They'll leave AMA. I want to tell you a couple stories that are really interesting that was told by one of the physicians in Philadelphia, which I thought was interesting. There was a young woman that actually came in, was admitted to one of the emergency rooms, and she was injecting the drugs, and she had a really nasty, terrible wound on her leg. Gangrene had set in. So when she came in, she obviously was coming in because of the leg, but also because of, everything else, because you're injecting within this. They had to immediately go up to the OR. They ended up amputating the leg. By the time they amputated the leg and she kind of came off of that, the withdrawal started really sitting in. So what she do? She left AMA. She ended up going back out, obviously, to inject. And she came back 2 weeks later with the sore on the other leg, and they had to amputate the other leg. This is how bad those are starting to get. People are losing limbs over it necessarily because gangrene's sitting in and not taking care of it. So, the other one is a young man that's down into here that I want to talk about, which is a harm reduction program in Philadelphia called Savage Sisters Recovery. They go out like a lot of your bigger cities with harm reduction, and they will either do needle exchange programs. I've also seen within harm reduction within the naloxone, but they go out specifically to go look for people to administer naloxone for. I've also seen programs in other countries and other cities where they go out on bikes and they'll go out and try to find these people to administer it. What they're carrying with them now is they're carrying what we call pulse ox to basically check and see what their oxygen levels are within the naloxone. So once they administer that and they do check, this is why, this I'll get to your question. This is why they're checking their breathing. What the xylazine will do is it will knock that breathing down, it's a sedative. And so what they're having to check is their breathing the whole time. And a lot of people don't like to give mouth to mouth. So they've got to be able to keep that breathing going, because once you administer the naloxone and it takes care of obviously the opiate side of it, it's not taking care of the xylazine. So they now have to make sure they're getting EMTs there as quick as they can to keep the breathing, but the breathing will slowly stop. That's where and they're like, why is this not working? Why is this not working? It's because of the xylazine. So now you have to watch the breathing. The breathing is probably your biggest things, because it's cutting that breathing portion down completely. So that's what they are carrying with them. There was a man that they talked about within this one where they did administer the naloxone, but they had to keep that airway open. So they had to kind of do rest, and they had to keep that airway completely open. And it saved his life, but they wouldn't have known if they hadn't known that. Other question up in here is potency. Why in the combination within fentanyl? It all has to do with what we call the nod. That's that dreamy, wakeful sleep that people like when they take a lot of these drugs that are out there. Like I said, it does have a very short half-life, very quick. So they've got to be able to inject this and find it. And then decreases the frequency of the use of the fentanyl because it prolongs that portion to it. So, and then they'll do it now just to push off the withdrawals. The withdrawals are just gotten so bad it's out there. So, and then does naloxone work? It depends on how much opioids are again in that system, which we talked about. And then, like I said, with the pulse oxes, and then you've got to check the breathing and keep that airway open. So when you come across that, these are the two things we have to check with, especially with those. So, any questions on these?
What's the cost of the street level to that road versus something else that you're trying to?
The price portions, I'm not getting as solid on the price portions. I know fentanyl is down to almost like $8 in some to 10, because it's just the one pill because of the potency, but nobody knows what the potency is unless they're tested. So I know fentanyl's gotten cheap. I would imagine xylazines, I'll bet it's just as cheap, but we're not getting price ones back yet. And it goes back to the economics where we don't know yet. And I've checked and I'm getting too much variation. So that's why I'm like, we don't. Heroin used to be free. This is drug dealing 101. You give it out for free, then when they're addicted, they're going to come back and pay whatever. And so heroin now has gone up because it then went to like 5, 10, 15, 20. It's like, I think we're sitting at an average of maybe 15, $20 compared to fentanyl, which is less than that. It's more potent. So heroin's now going up. And so what are they doing? Cartels just switched over. So, and with the legalization, don't get me started on legalization. Marijuana's changed the whole.
Says it's not there. They're not doing it.
So my take on it is we should just invade Mexico and Canada. Just bring them in. Let's just all be one happy family. I didn't mean invade. Let's just be friendly.
I just want to know how it helps someone that's like this. If they're not able to treat their withdrawal symptoms in the hospital, how can you help?
They're playing with new treatment options because they're looking at the same way that we can handle like an overdose to kind of reverse some things with clonidine. They're playing with, and there's a list of drugs that are out there. It's the pain portion because we don't, the traditional, we don't know. That's the easiest way to answer it. But what we do know is that the traditional treatment methods for opioid addiction, that all we named out there, it doesn't work with this one. So they are trying to play with something as much as they can, but it's happened so fast and everything's happened so fast. They're trying to care for them. The problem is they won't stay in long enough. They're just going right back out. And we've got the turnover in a lot of these cities now, and the deaths, they're keeping up with them. That's why when I got in this, I was like, whoa, can we slow down as we could figure these things out? It's happening too fast, and they're trying to get because we're working on the studies right now to see what we can and what we can't do. That's how fresh this is. So yeah, we're not knowing what that's going to help within the treatment. So And if they're, and the reason why it's kind of scary is because what's our traditional ways to be able to handle pain when we go to the ED? It's opioids, but the opioids aren't working because they've already built that time, they've built that so high. We can't give them a level that's ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Knocked out, let them go to coma for until they're done with withdrawal.
That was the story with that lady because they knocked her out to do the amputation. But when she came off of that,
What about a medically induced coma for 30 days?
our emergency room department, it makes sense, but our emergency departments can't handle them. They can't put everybody in a coma. It's just too much.
Maybe the only thing they got.
Yeah, but we don't have the facility space, not that.
Not night of the,
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, this is just scary. It's kind of scary. Last piece I want to talk about, I'm actually over a little bit, so I'm going to zip through this fast. Sat through another presentation. Any other questions on xylazine? Okay. This is a partnership between the Power of Putnam, which is a coalition, and then also with the University of Tennessee and also Tennessee Tech. They came together to produce a program out there that to basically work with veterinarians on drugs that are being diverted. So let me talk a little bit about this. I took this from their slides, just kind of condense it down to about 4 or 5 slides. What is that drug diversion? It's basically moving it from a lawful to an unlawful portion. And there are some very tricky ways that people are diverting drugs out there. Very tricky. The one that gets me is people that divert to steal medications, especially within prescription drugs. If anybody's ever looked at the obituaries in the paper, I always look in there to see if I'm in there. But if you follow an obituary in the paper, you can sometimes tell, depending on how much information they gave. I think people are doing this less and less now. But you can look. You look down at the bottom, and if that person was in the care of hospice, the chances that they had some meds in that house, pretty high, right? And you look down at the bottom, and it's going to tell you exactly when the whole family is going to be gone, if you hadn't gotten rid of those drugs. So then people break into the homes while they're at the funeral. And this is just these many ways that people steal these drugs that are out there. The other one they're doing is what we call doctor shopping, but now we're talking about vet shopping. Like I said, the majority of the meds that are out there, and let me cover these real quick. These are dispensations when dispensing these drugs, if they're tracking. This is in, where's my number? 2021. And then this is when we start to look at it, that we have more. What these graphs are basically telling you is that we don't have a good reporting system like we do with humans. We don't necessarily have them with vets. So what they've done is they've actually surveyed vets out there. If they kind of look at it, are the drugs for animals and humans the same? Yes. For example, if I'm having a very hard time, I can go in and get an antidepressant or an anti-type of anxiety pill, and it may take 50 milligrams for me, but my dog will take about 250 to 300 milligrams. So more milligrams within vets, yes, a lot higher. So what people are doing, or that's the nice way of putting it. They'll take their dog in there and they'll be saying, yeah, my dog's struggling with these things like this. They'll get the pills, and then obviously it's not for the dog, it's for them. The other one that's scary, people are actually going to the pound, they're getting dogs and cats, and they're purposely breaking their legs. Punishing these animals, take it in there so that they can get the pain meds for the dogs and for the animals. Yeah, that's the scary part of this one that's out there. Misuse of concerns that are out there. We're seeing a lot more trends with diversion within these drugs, within vets. So what they're doing, and what's kind of a cool suggestion in there, is that they surveyed a lot of veterinarians and found out that they didn't know about a lot of this stuff because they're there just to treat it, and they never thought somebody would divert it from vet offices. So they came up with a program that's out there. It's a veterinarian continuing education. So if you're looking for people to pull onto an impact team or into your coalition, pull a vet. Bring a vet in. This is where we talk about our prescription drugs and our opioids and our different issues that are out there. Bring the vets in there. These are good people to have on there, but also what they're trying to do is give them the chance. They have to have a certain amount of CEUs every year. And they have this program that's out there that has these 6 modules in it. And this is what it covers, and they can get, it's up to 2 hours now. The new one's up to 2, but this is their program that's out there. It's free. It's for anybody throughout the United States. They can sign up for it. I'll tell you this, there is a wait on it. I signed up for it last week, and I still haven't got permission to come in to take the course. They're kind of backed up. I don't know if it's something happening within the university. I'm still trying to check into it. But they do have things that you can do in your community, the same we would do with opioid program, like with Mallory, we do lock boxes and we do other things out there, but they can also do that through the vet offices to lock the meds up, especially within their animals. But again, there's a whole bunch of information that we can get out to help prevent diversion within veterinary medications that are out there. So this is their website right now. And then this will be on the slides when I put it out there. You guys can click on this if you guys want to take a class or if you want to work with vets in your communities throughout Idaho. So thank you.
Thank you.